So so actually, JT and I are just getting to know each other because so Dr. Eva Marie Muller-Stuhler was due to speak to us from IBM. She'll be back as well, but she's been put on some pretty heavy projects. So she asked, so actually she might be around. She might say hello. She is going to pop her head in, but she's asked if she could speak next time. So I got a hold of JT and just incredible. He's like, yeah, put me on. Put me on, I'm ready. So it was only a few days ago. I was like, I can work with someone like this. So I'll read you what I've been putting up around Dr. JT Kostman, recognized by his peers, the press, professional associations, as one of the world-leading experts in applied AI and cognitive computing. A highly sought-after speaker, yes, he is, I can confirm, writer, advisor, and educator. He's earned a reputation for his ability to demystify frontier technologies and for developing practical, actionable, data-driven solutions. So his business is ProtectedBy.AI, ProtectedBy.AI, if you want to check them out, where he's CEO. So they're developing cost-effective AI-enabled solutions, all about augmenting human capabilities, optimizing performance for the government and private sector clients all around the world. My favorite bit as well is JT said, what was Eva going to talk about? And I said, the reasons why AI projects fail. He said, leave it in. Leave the title in then. Hey, Dave, great to see you. So he's just taken off where she left off. So JT, is that enough intro for you?
That is more than enough intro for me. Thank you very much.
Have you got slides?
You know, I decided we're going to go no death by PowerPoint for the change. We're just going to, let's treat this like a TED Talk. Let's treat this more like a conversation than a presentation. I'll encourage all of you. Chime in if you'd like. I'm going to keep my comments brief. And after that, I'm here for you, here to answer questions and after to answer questions also. And in fact, in that same spirit, what I decided to do was something a little bit different today. Everybody is feeling the constraints of COVID, I should imagine, wherever you're joining us from around the world. We all have been trapped indoors with people we are driving crazy and who are driving us crazy for far too long. So I thought I would take you on a little bit of a virtual field trip. And actually, let's say less of a virtual field trip than an imaginary field trip. So I'd like you to do this for me, please. Imagine this. Close your eyes if you like, leave them open. It doesn't matter, I'm not much to look at. But I want you to try to imagine that wherever you are today, you're not there. You're in my city, you're in New York. And it's not today, it's a few days ago. It's September 4th, 1882. And you're working down on Wall Street. Not just anywhere on Wall Street. You're working at number 11 Wall Street, the home of the New York Stock Exchange. Now remember, 1882, this is a time in the States where homes were heated by coal and lit by lanterns, and the most common transportation device was fueled by hay, and don't get me started on its exhaust. But today you are working and you are living in that environment way back when, and from where you're standing now on Wall Street, just a few blocks away, where Pearl Street intersects Fulton, a young entrepreneurial inventor is about to flip a switch. And when he does, he's going to usher in the electrical age. Imagine for a moment what it must have been like. Not if you were in that magical mile, but if you were across the river in the dark and looking in toward the light. I bring us there because that's where we are again today. 138 years later, almost exactly, we're back to that same time again. Only this time, the force that's changing every aspect of our lives isn't electricity, it's artificial intelligence. You know, Google's CEO, Sundar Pichai, recently said that artificial intelligence is the most important thing humanity is working on. Its impact, he said, will be more profound than electricity or even than fire. I'm not sure if I agree with fire, but electricity, he's certainly right, I think. The economic impact of failing to adopt AI, to incorporate it into your organization, means it's no longer any more of a choice for companies to ignore AI than it was for companies to get plugged into the power grid in the late 1800s and early 1900s. We can now see that companies have to have these capabilities to remain viable, to remain competitive. But we can all imagine a time, I think, that there were companies around when Edison flipped that magical switch that was saying, well, we've already got always gotten along without electricity. Why do we need that now? How do I justify the expense? But then on the other hand, can my business continue to thrive, even survive, if I don't get plugged in? Well, those are the very same questions our clients, the companies we work with, the countries that we serve are asking again today, and for good reason. Forrester Research recently reported that businesses adopting AI and big data analytics will take, wait for it, $1.3 trillion from their less informed peers by the end of this year. $1.3 trillion. To put that in some context, that's roughly the equivalent of the GDP of Australia or Brazil, shifting to the fortunate few in the Fortune 500 companies that have already made these investments and away from the very companies that are simultaneously being hit the hardest by COVID. Well, those companies are the ones that are seeing this need for automation, this need to make this shift, but so many of them are left in the dark. Even those that have started to see the light, that have started to realize that they need to adapt AI and they need to incorporate cutting edge tech into their companies, are facing almost insurmountable obstacles. A study conducted by the Standish Group a few years ago, investigating 50,000 software projects from around the world, from the more banal and mundane all the way to cutting edge AI, found that less than 20% of all IT projects achieve their intended objectives. Think about that. Less than 20%. We have an almost perfect Pareto where 20% are successful. The other 80% are anywhere on the continuum of failure to absolute and abysmal failure. Why? Why is that happening? Well, I've been doing this for a very long time. Richard was good enough to tease when we got on the call that I must have a picture of Dorian Gray in my attic because the camera lies. The camera makes you think I'm a little bit younger than I am, I hope. And in fact, I've been doing this, and this particular question has been vexing me and has driven most of my work for, I hate to admit it, a little over 30 years, arguably a little bit over 40 years. I've been focused fixedly on this question. Truth be told, I've been thinking about this since I first learned to code, which, to put my age in some context for you, I learned to code on an IBM 1620 with Hollerith punch cards back in the 70s when it was a relatively new machine. It was back then that I also became consumed by advances being made in this brand new field, which was born just a few years before, specifically in 1956 at a summer conference held at Dartmouth College, a field that was being called artificial intelligence. This captured my imagination. I was a great Asimov fan. I was a great fan of science fiction at the time. And I loved the idea that we could make computers that could actually simulate human intelligence and maybe even exceed human intelligence one day. It was my work in that arena that eventually led to my relationship with IBM further than just programming on the 1620. Eventually, they came to name me, Big Blue named me their think leader, whatever that means, a few years ago. And I really loved IBM. I thought very highly of them, which is why I was so disappointed, as I'm sure most of you on the call were, when over the past few years, we saw them overhyping and underdelivering and misunderstanding fundamentally AI. Their marketing teams were touting Watson as some Deus Machina magical solution that can just be purchased, plugged in, and miraculously be able to solve every possible problem, from cooking to cancer research, just with the flip of a switch. Please, this is not as simple as electricity, is it? Those of you who are following the news saw just how catastrophically wrong-headed this hyperbolic mindset can go, most obviously exemplified by IBM's catastrophic failure at MD Anderson Cancer Research Center just in 2016. The research center, after spending $62 million on a system that promised to revolutionize cancer care, they ended up having to pull it out completely, write off all that money, $62 million, calling the Watson Oncology Project an unqualified disaster and a complete failure. Why? How did things go so wrong? How could Big Blue have blown it so badly? That was a question that I took very seriously and very personally. And to better understand that, what happened at MD Anderson, what happened with so many failed initiatives, I think you also have to reach back again into history. This time a little bit more recent history, not as far back as 1882. Let's go back instead to 1993. 1993 is when two fellows by the name of James Champy and Michael Hammer wrote a book that launched one of the hottest management fads of all time. Most of you on the call are old enough to remember it. What was it? Re-engineering. You remember their book, Re-engineering the Corporation, a manifesto for business revolution. Reimagine promised to change everything, almost as if by magic. Productivity, profitability, quality, customer service. I think it would let you grow hair if you were bald and get your cat to not go on the couch. They promised everything. Everything could be improved, they said, almost overnight. And yet, I suspect most of you also remember what an utter and dismal failure re-engineering proved to be. Why? Well, in eulogizing what promised to be the biggest improvement to productivity in history, Michael Hammer got hammered in the Wall Street Journal just 3 years after their movement began. And he was forced to do a mea culpa and admit to the public, the press, and the millions of pissed off people who lost their jobs and collectively lost billions of dollars why it failed. Hammer was forced to admit his re-engineering theory was doomed to fail from the start because it suffered from one fundamental and fatal flaw. It failed to consider the importance of people. Quoting Hammer in the Wall Street Journal, "I wasn't smart enough about that," he said. "I was reflecting my engineering background and was insufficiently appreciative of the human dimension. I've learned that's critical." Duh. There it is. The reason technology initiatives fail, and AI in particular, almost never has anything to do with the technology. It's the people that determine how successful AI can be. Is it meeting customers' real needs? Can employees use it effectively to augment their intelligence? Can the capabilities be effectively assimilated into the corporate culture? How will things have to change to ensure AI enhancements are optimized and utilized? These are the questions we need to ask. Those were precisely the questions I asked myself when I got a call one sunny Sunday afternoon from a fellow who introduced himself as James Clapper, the soon-to-be appointed United States Director of National Intelligence. The 9/11 Commission had reported, surprise, surprise, that the intelligence community had all the data they needed to have detected and thwarted those terrorist attacks on 9/11. The problem, Clapper said, was that while we didn't have the ability to find those needles in those countless haystacks that were all siloed all over the Beltway, let alone systems for assuring people would actually share that information. What I told General Clapper, DNI Clapper, was that while I certainly could build systems for him that could be able to do what AI does best, and we all know what that is, right? Detect patterns, disclose anomalies, forecast trends, and connect the dots. And when it comes down to it, tell your friends and family who wonder what it is AI can actually do. That's it. There's 4 things. We detect patterns, disclose anomalies, forecast trends, and connect the dots. I told him, while we could build a system that could do that, what the US intelligence community really needed was not just a technical solution, but a socio-technical solution, what I've come to call a symbiotic solution, symbiotic solution, one that brings the most advanced technology practical to address the challenges at hand, but does so mindful of the psychology of the users and the customers those systems are intended to augment and to serve. What Richard didn't mention when he introduced me is I am by training a data scientist, a mathematician, and I'm also a psychologist. And that was something that Director Clapper pointed out. He told me, "Why do you think I'm calling you? You're a geek and you're also a shrink." And that's precisely what I ended up doing for the intelligence community, for the defense community, eventually and the security agencies, but eventually also while serving as the chief data scientist for Samsung, as the chief data officer for Time Inc., we built these symbiotic systems that are still in place protecting the United States. And since leaving government, my teams and I have implemented these kinds of systems to cost effectively fight fraud, abuse, corruption, and waste for countries around the world, as well as to sell cell phones, gain insights into audiences, improve processes, and in our spare time, we helped get President Barack Obama reelected in 2012. That, in short, has been the secret sauce of my success. My success has been predicated on having implemented sophisticated solutions on the cutting edge of AI for companies around the world, but by attending in equal measure, maybe even in more measure, to the human dimension. If you want to succeed and even exceed expectations, I maintain, you have to develop systems that is symbiotic. So if that's all there is to it, why don't organizations just ensure AI is effectively integrated and assimilated into their culture and be done with it there? Well, I took you on a field trip. Now I'm going to have you do some exercise. Here's what I'd like you to do. Except for the one fellow who's driving. If you're driving, don't play along. But if you're parked or if you're at home or in your office, if you're someplace safe, I want you to try this with me, please. Fold your arms. Just really actually do it for a minute. Fold your arms and see how that feels. Terrific, very comfortable. You've all probably done it hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of times in the course of your life, depending on how old you are. Now, here's what I'd like you to do. I, Dr. J.T. Kostman, see, you have to say it like that. Dr. J.T. Kostman did some research and found that if you were to just fold your arms a different way, your life would be much happier. You'd be much more successful. Your children would listen to you. The dog would do what you tell it to do, and you would have a full head of hair into your 90s. So all you have to do that is fold your arms the opposite way. So go ahead and try that for me now. If you're used to folding them right over left, put them left over right or vice versa. I want you to fold your arms backward. I want you to realize, how does that feel? Feels weird, right? Feels awkward. It feels uncomfortable. But I told you to do it, and I told you it's going to really improve things for you, so you're going to stick with it. And you'll stick with it for the first day, and you'll say to yourself, all right, this is awkward, this is ridiculous, but I paid Dr. Kostman a lot of money, so I'm going to try this, I'll stick with it. You go for the second day, and you say, I never knew what his doctorates were in. I didn't know if the guy was really as smart as he is claiming to be. I don't know if it was worth the money I paid him. I don't know, but I'm going to stick with it. By the third day, you're thinking, you know what? COVID, and I'm trying to lose weight, and I'm drinking less, and I can't take it, and fold back. Go ahead and fold your arms back the other way. Do you hear that? That little mental, that's the problem. That's the problem. By the way, 3 days is about how often a new gym membership gets used for exactly that reason. But it takes time for us to habituate and to learn these new ways of thinking. One of the things that I find fascinating about that stupid little exercise is the fact that it turns out there is no right way to fold your arms. About half the population folds right over left, half folds left over right. It has nothing to do even with handedness. It's just habit. It's just the way that our minds have become wired as a consequence of doing the same thing over and over again. As I mentioned, I'm a data scientist and a mathematician, and I've had the great honor of having led what are arguably some of the most sophisticated and complicated AI initiatives that have ever been implemented, whether at Time Inc., at Samsung, or while serving the US intelligence, defense, and security agencies. But I am also a psychologist, and I find I tend to rely on my training as a shrink even more than my technical acumen. And with that said, I'm reminded, and always have to remind my colleagues and clients, that AI is not like an appliance. It's not a dishwasher. It's not a microwave oven. You can't just plug it in and assume everything will be fine. AI requires careful consideration of the needs and abilities of employees, it has to consider the interests of end users, and the culture and the capabilities of the organizations in which it's implemented. Our President John F. Kennedy in the United States once said, change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. I tend to say that change is painful, but nothing is as painful as failing because you couldn't change. That's all I really wanted to share with you today, other than to say, I may be the only doctor left who still makes house calls. So if there's anything I can do to help you, I would be happy to. Please just drop me a note. Thank you very much.
JT,
Wow.
thank you.
Definitely a magic storyteller, isn't it? I think this is one of the greatest story coming from electricity to AI, and what a profound impact it has had on us. I think, JT, it's amazing to hear you, not just your bios, but the talk itself. And of course, your background is so interesting that I'm just trying to find out what all is there. But
So
yes,
if you would just tell my wife that I'm actually interesting, I'd really appreciate it. Or my grandchildren, that would be great.
yes, we'll do that definitely. But yes, yeah, the key points that people need to take from here is how mindful we need to be, as to what technology is doing to us, and how realistic as well we need to be. And technology and psychology will go hand in hand. I think adding the human dimension to it is something which is going to make our algorithms more successful, especially the explainable AI is and the ethical AI is the part that people are looking for. And if we don't put in the human dimension, of course, we can't, add value to what AI is doing. Especially, we need to deliver to our customers, our employees, to colleagues, everything. So I think what you're doing is really great. And of course, I think, Richard, you can agree that, just anybody reading the bios of JT will only think, oh, what he has been doing is immense work in AI and technology, and associating psychology to it. Oh, it's tremendous. Thank you, JT.